So, thanks for having me come and visit you here in Seattle.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. And who are you?
I'm Tony Wright with RescueTime.
And what does RescueTime do?
Well, we're doing what the rest of the internet isn't doing. We're actually helping people be more productive. So
you're not Twitter.
We are not Twitter. We are the anti-Twitter. Yep. Basically, it's a tool that allows people to understand exactly how they spend their time without actually doing any data entry around it.
Okay.
So it's kind of a passive thing that sits in the background. It pays attention to what's in focus, whether it's a website or an application, and then pushes that into the cloud and allows you to do analytics on that data. And that can be an individual thing, or it can also be a business thing, which gets additionally scary.
Now, can I put this on Rocky's computer? You know, my trusty producer, so I can see what porn sites he's visiting.
You could, but he'd get wise. I mean, we set out actually to make it an overt application. There is no stealth mode. There's no way to put it on someone's computer without them knowing about it. So I mean, we knew out of the gates there's obviously a corporate demand to, in some settings to spy on employees.
Yeah.
We don't think that's the right approach to time management. We actually think that if you do it inclusively, if people, and we see this in our data, right? I mean, we have all this data gets pushed to our server, so we see literally, millions of man hours of data, and we see that as people use it, they actually get more productive. It's a 9% boost over 3 months of use is what we're seeing. So basically, of self-identified productive stuff.
So you start out, and you realize, oh, I'm spending 17 hours a day on Twitter.
Yeah, there's that reality.
You go, man, that really is not the best use of my time.
Yeah, there's a reality skew, right? I mean, you have this idea of, oh, I'm a pretty productive guy, and you say, well, so how much time do you spend in IM or Twitter? And well, maybe 30, 40 minutes a day. And then when you actually see the data and you realize, just the magnitude of that stuff that you think are these little slices of your time that add up to just tremendous amounts of time, it's pretty daunting. So there's that sort of cycle of realization that people use it. It takes about a week before you actually start to sense patterns. Then you're horrified, and then you usually Twitter about it or you blog about it, yeah. Which is how we're growing. And then you start to change your behavior a little bit. And we're starting to kind of introduce tools within the system to help people kind of shape their own behavior if they want to. Alternatively, it's just kind of I use the phrase data porn sometimes, yeah. That people sometimes just like to see and understand this stuff and just find it interesting.
Now, does it show things like Second Life or World of Warcraft as well, which are applications, mm-hmm. or does it show it time spent in Excel versus Word? Or?
Right. Yeah. It's everything. I mean, we there are some tools out there that will let you understand your web usage, and tools out there that let you understand your applications, but we find that the area, I mean, it's graying, right? I mean, a web application, Gmail, deserves the same respect that Outlook deserves, and more. We actually find that about 60% of all time spent in our user base, and we have 40,000 users and counting, is in an application that is dependent on the internet, whether it's a web browser or an email program or an IM client or what have you. So the web is a big slice of people's time, and it's something about 30% is within the browser in our user base, which is, we're pretty skewed towards early adopters right now. So.
Yeah. What does it look like? What kinds of charts do I see when I run this, and how long do I have to run it before I get decent data to really have some fun with?
So yeah, I'll log in and
I'll. An hour, or does it need to run for a day or a week? How long does it take to get really some useful data out of your account?
We think, we think it's more interesting over longer periods of time, which is a challenge. I mean, like Google Analytics, right? I mean, it's one of the things where you install it one day and then the next day, well, a day of data is not really a good way to do analytics. So the more time that you have, the more interesting it gets, and trend data is interesting, right? If you've worked at a job for 12 months and you have data, you can see, wait a minute, this job is bringing me down. I'm no longer as productive as I was at the beginning of this. I'm losing my, my mojo or my ambition or my energy level. And what is that? Do I need a vacation? We actually found, and we showed this off, we're a Y Combinator company.
Yeah.
So we showed that Brian.
Explain what that is, because
sure.
Some people watching Fast Company might not have heard of Y Combinator.
So Y Combinator is kind of a very geek-centric seed funding program started by a guy named Paul Graham, who's pretty famous essayist in the kind of software arena, and a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. And he basically decided that he wanted to sort of replicate what makes technology companies great at the beginning, which is a kind of a scarcity of money and a scarcity of time and a couple of kind of hacker builder types, not very sort of business centric, but just trying to build something great in 3 months. So he gives a small amount of money to the companies that he funds, and it's actually a group of people. And they give a small amount of money to the companies that they fund, usually 15 to 20 grand, and in 3 months has kind of a debutante ball called Demo Day, where you're introduced to a bunch of investors, give a 7-minute pitch, and then you're kind of turned loose. And it's about 3 years old. They don't release how many applications they get, but they get, I think, thousands, and they pick somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 companies every 6 months to run through this program. So it was a heck of an experience. It was really neat. But at Demo Day, this this debutante ball in front of investors, we showed this really amazing trend that we saw with one of my co-founders. Kind of busting some myths of productivity that Brian would have this scallop graph of productivity where he would take a day off and then he'd be insanely productive for several days after that, and then very quickly kind of trend downward. And the instant he took a day off, he would spike right back up. And this is a trend that we just never knew about before, right? I mean, Brian was always in front of his computer. He looked busy, but he just couldn't, focus for, 6-10 days straight. So it's one of those things where Brian taking a different work pattern of working 3 days on, 1 day off has, very dramatic ramifications on how he works. So that was pretty neat. So this you see is my data, and I have to say that we're fundraising right now. So my data is I fancy myself a builder, and it should be working in development tools and Photoshop and things like that. And of late, that hasn't been my job. But these are the kind of graphs that you can see here.
And so your efficiency, what does that mean?
So we wanted to get a concept where you see all this data and pretty soon you realize that it's too much and it's hard to sort of get a sense of 1 week to the next. So we wanted to have this concept of scoring, of be able to show people, hey, this week you did better than last week, good job, or not so good job. So we allow people to assign a really simple score to categories of software. Yep. So you could say development tools for me is the highest productivity. Email for me is kind of iffy, it's midway. Instant message for me is productivity death. So if I'm in an IM client, it's awful. So I have that very negatively scored. So efficiency is kind of the ratio of good to bad.
Now what if something like Twitter is both a waste of time, but it also provides some real value, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where
there's a difference between reading a Twitter message or writing one that says I ate a chicken salad sandwich for lunch,
right,
versus I need to talk to Jason Calacanis and have him call you on the phone.
Yeah, I know. I've actually talked to people who use Twitter as their primary email client now, just because it's permission based. So it's kind of a personal decision on how you score it. Right now, we think it would cease to be time management if we gave you tools to granularly, say, score each tweet. Because you can imagine, well, if you're really spending 6 hours a day scoring tweets, probably no longer a productivity tool. But it is very subjective where I think as, for what you do for a living, Twitter is instrumental and friend feed is instrumental. For me and the stage that I am in with my business, Twitter's probably not the best thing I could be doing with my time. We're a 3-person team. Yeah. So it's pretty it's pretty bad if I'm in Twitter, although I am more than I should be.
And we can see that, right?
Yeah.
So where do we see that you're in Twitter too much?
So this is this week. So I'm actually going to kick back a couple of weeks. So we have some date controls up here, and I'll kick back. We'll go all the way back to. That's right before Demo Day at Y Combinator. We'll go back to March 2.
So you just went through Y Combinator just recently?
Yeah, so this was basically January through March, and the Demo Day was at the end of March.
Very cool.
So yeah, it's a much nicer looking data back then too, which is why I show that particular week.
Okay.
So you can see the top category of time that I spent, and this is on the right before demo day, so I was doing stuff within PowerPoint, design stuff, making a slick presentation. You can see that that was 14 hours, 23% of my time that week. You can see that in front of my computer, I spent 62 hours and 5 minutes, and you can kind of see the week on sort of how it went. Now we could, if we wanted to, decide, let's look at this Monday, it's 10 hours. We can click on that and actually zoom in and then look at that on sort of an hour-by-hour basis. So what we eventually want to do is start, I think.
So where's the Twitter chart?
I don't know if Twitter's going to be in my top 10. So you can see my top, we can scroll down a bit, and you can see my top applications and websites.
So that's powerful.
And Twitter does not make my top 10, which makes me happy. but you can see PowerPoint.
But on my chart, PowerPoint would be like number 15, and Twitter would be number 2, and FriendFeed would be number 1, right?
And if I had my druthers, PowerPoint wouldn't be on my top 10. I'm not a big PowerPoint fan, but for this particular week, it was my life. I mean, we see some really interesting data in here in the aggregate, and that's one of the things that we think is exciting about RescueTime is that we literally have users volunteering second-by-second attention data on how they're spending their lives, how they're shifting contexts and not. We think it gives us pretty tremendous insight into kind of the information overload and how people work and how that's changing. I mean, you can imagine that it's funny because we gave a little bit of data to TechCrunch and they wrote an article around it. And I don't know if I'm even supposed to say this, so you can edit it out if I'm not. But the next couple of days, Google calls and says, "Do you have any more data like that?" And it, to have Google call and say, "Hey, do you guys have some data we could borrow?" is a pretty neat thing, right? And what they were, is from their apps team, and I think what they're interested to know is the sort of trend data of, Microsoft Word versus the online Office, version, right? I mean, no one really can compare. How is one trending versus the other? Is market share really eroding? Are people spending less time in offline Office versus online? So we think there's some really interesting stuff to be had there.
Have you seen any trends like that yet?
So our overtimeness is, we're young enough that we have 4 months of really solid data. So trends are pretty hard to identify at this point. We've seen some pretty staggering data though in the aggregate. My favorite stat is that the average RescueTime user alt tabs to an instant message window 77 times in a day. And just the sheer amount of moving back and forth and context shifting is dramatic. The other thing that we found that was really interesting is the long tail of how people spend their time.
Yeah.
That, when at the beginning of this, the first time I was able to visualize this data, this chart here, it was the top 10 applications and websites, right?
Yeah.
So you see PowerPoint and Gmail and RescueTime.com. I spent a little bit of time there. And we thought, okay, let's look at that data. And the first time we saw it, we were like, that's wrong. It's like 7 hours. And I know I've been in front of the computer for 9 or 10. Because we assumed that those top 10 applications and websites would make up the lion's share of how we spent our time. But it turns out that we needed to include this others bar, which for this week is incredibly focused. It's 13% of my time. What we find is that users are in the sort of 25 to 40% of their time are spent in that long tail.
And can you dig down into that?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a list view that if you really, really want to, you can look at basically a stack ranked list of every single website and application that you go to.
Now, an anthropologist would love this stuff, right?
Yeah, we've
to
got
be able to instrument your system and watch you over time and see how you work and what you do.
Yeah, we've had a lot of actually academic interest as well of people who just understanding human behavior, and I mean I think there's I think businesses and your Twitters of the world are getting really, really good at the science of kind of technology addiction and sort of how to make people really want to use their stuff and keep wanting to use it and keep coming back. And I sense my own sort of compulsion with Twitter of, just the
For me, it's FriendFeed.
Yeah, I know. I've read something about that. But yeah, so I think it's academically.
Which is Twitter anyways.
Yeah, it's Twitter with threaded comments.
Yeah.
No, I'm a big fan of FriendFeed too, actually. And the uptime is a bonus. But yeah, so we think the data is pretty interesting academically as well.
Now that's interesting. Can you see actual effects on your user base when Twitter's down? Can you see more people that the time shifted because people
got more productive? Yeah,
got more productive, or started doing other things. Started playing solitaire again instead of being on Twitter and sending messages to everybody.
We haven't. I mean, we aren't really set up right now. Our focus is to basically give users a compelling reason why it would be great to be using RescueTime, right? We're focusing on value for our users and for the businesses that are signing up. So we're really poorly set up to actually do data mining. What that means is essentially it's not very time consuming for us, but we set up a query, hit go, and then have to wait an inordinate amount of time while our crappy hardware runs the very long query.
Now, is there any way to turn this into a game while you're working? Okay, I know I spend way too much time in Twitter or in World of Warcraft or whatever, so I'm going to put a little game in here. Is there a way for me to turn a timer on, or if I spend 5 hours on Twitter, I have to put $1 in a jar for the beer bash on Fridays?
The competitive aspect of it is interesting, and we just launched kind of a team version, and we've seen people doing that, right? Where they basically it's like a Microsoft engineer that I know said it's like a video game for work, right? Is that he is trying to sort of clobber his teammates, and then there's obviously this big cult of productivity online now with the GTD, getting things done. Tim Ferriss. This stuff is big. So I think there is a lot of potential for competition there. Right now, there's just kind of a team comparison thing where you can elect to see sort of high-level information about other people on your team. We very much don't want to be the tool where the boss can look at second-by-second understanding of how people spend their time. But we think some high-level stuff is interesting, and we also think there's kind of some neat benchmarking stuff that you can do, where you could say that you as an individual are the top 5% of software developers in terms of focus and productivity, or your business is the bottom 10% in terms of your business spends twice as much on communication as the average business in your sector. So we think there's some neat comparison stuff that can bring out some of that kind of competitive aspect.
How are you guys going to make money with this?
That's a great question. So right now we have a premium offering for businesses that's a monthly kind of software as a service thing, and that's a couple weeks old, and we have a mess of businesses who've signed up so far, and have some signing up every day. So we have kind of that group's offering. We also, we think eventually at scale the data gets interesting and potentially has some value. Again, that's the home run holy grail of, we have something neat here. But again, I think our focus needs to be on how can we help people in the way they want to be helped. There is I'm not a big fan of targeted advertising as the business model, but you can imagine that our targeting could be better than any other website on the planet.
Why is that?
Well, because we know literally every single thing that you do.
That's true.
And we do actually give our users a lot of control. I shouldn't say that, because we do give users basically the ability to whitelist. They can say, here are the 20 websites that I want to track. Everything else should get sent as miscellaneous surfing. So there are a lot of privacy controls. You can delete data. We want to give that put that in the hands of the users. But we do obviously have a lot of kind of attention data that gets pretty interesting. So we think that could be powerful. Again, in tools, I've never seen an ad in Gmail, much less clicked on it, but I know that they're there, right? So I think in tools, even like Facebook, oftentimes you become blind to those ads. So I'm a little bit leery of that as a business model.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much. Anything else you wanted to show me? Because this is pretty cool. I'm going to try playing with it.
Yeah, I'd love to
I'm going to get really scared by my graphs, So.
We do have basically this concept of goals and alerts, which is basically the idea. I mean, this is our first foray into, okay, now you have this data, how can you improve it? And the idea is that you can set a positive goal of, I want to spend more than 5 hours on work in a given day, stuff that I label as work, or less than half an hour a day on things labeled as social networking. And those can basically just be goals that you track, or you can get it into alerts where you actually get nudged when that occurs. You'll get a little email, IM, or SMS of, hey, you just eclipsed your social networking target there. You probably ought to get back to work. Ultimately, we think the sort of social aspect of those, where if you're on a team, if I sent a little interruptive alert said, hey, you are now officially dragging down the team in terms of social networking time, that would be a not a send a note to the boss and have him come down like a hammer. That's just a little social nudge of, hey, you don't want to be the bottom on the wrong end of the curve here. And I think that I think the social aspects of it get pretty interesting.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.